The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, in some ways is a kindred spirit to the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies.
Sure.
For different reasons, but like you're saying, where it's like, well, yeah, if they wanted to make The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, it probably should have been more of a fairy tale movie than a high fantasy movie, which that's what this movie's presenting itself as.
Yes, it is presenting itself as high fantasy to compare to the success of Lord of the Rings.
Yes, whereas it's the same thing with The Hobbit. Like, The Hobbit should have been one movie and very tonally like a fairy tale adventure, as opposed to coming after Lord of the Rings and kind of have to ride certain thematic and tonal coattails that series established. Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision.
GenreVision is a weekly movie club where we discuss horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more.
And we're continuing our December holiday winter wonderland magic festival movie extravaganza theme month. That's the official name, by the way. With The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, obviously adapted from the very famous book and book series by C.S. Lewis. This came out in 2005. There is no question that it was trying to ride the popularity of things like Lord of the Rings, very particularly, and Harry Potter. Disney was actually behind the eight ball in this one. Warner Brothers had them beat when it came to getting those dollars from fantasy kids back then.
Sure. Well, and at the time that it came out, Return of the King had already won all the fucking Oscars, you know?
Oh, I'm sure it was in development even before then. So
absolutely. Well, as soon as they figured out that, the time to strike was nigh, it's like, okay, we gotta get on this high fantasy bandwagon now. Luckily they did in time, because this movie made enough of made enough money to warrant two sequels. So, it got that. But certainly did not have the kind of cultural impact of Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings.
No, we were, in various levels of high school and young adulthood when this came out, and the fervor just wasn't there in comparison to things like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. And that's always been one of the reasons I have not visited this movie, because when I was a very young kid, like elementary school age, I read Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. I might have even read it in school, but I know that I had the box set of the books when I was very, very young. But for whatever reason, they didn't call to me the way that The Hobbit did. And when we were coming together for this month, and we were like, oh, we want to do, kind of winter and snow and holiday stuff, you had pitched Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I was like, I think this is the right time to check it out, because it's pretty much vanished from the conversation in terms of comparing it to other fantasy epics of its time. It certainly feels like it's vanished in the conversation in relation to being part of the Disney canon. Like, this is a big, big Disney production.
Yeah, it was also a co-production with Walden.
Yes, that as well. And like you said, it got two sequels. Like, it didn't, like, if this had been the only one that came out and nothing else kind of ever manifested from it, even if they had, planned to make sequels, I think then maybe it would be even less of a curiosity. But this is a legitimate franchise. And I was expecting a particular experience when we started this. And I will give The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe this. The opening of this movie was not what I expected.
Same. Just for, before we move on from the financial stuff, I did a little bit of math here. I'm at usinflationcalculator.com. Worldwide, in its original release, it made $745 million, which is astonishing to me. I had no idea it made that much money.
Is that worldwide, including domestic, or just international?
Just international is $453 million.
Okay.
So including domestic and international, worldwide, that's $745 million. It's a lot of money. Would you care to guess how much that is in today's money?
Oh, I'd say what's that been? 15, 16 years? If it's not crossing $1 billion, it's got to be really close, like 900 something million.
It's over $1 billion. It is $1,060 million. So that's a big that's a big blockbuster. $745 million in 2005 was a big fucking deal.
Oh, sure. I mean, and I think it's interesting that they didn't capitalize on the sequel as maybe quickly as they could have. I don't know what situation that, what situations caused that to happen.
Business model was different back then.
Sure. But in relation to stuff like Harry Potter and more specifically Lord of the Rings, because that's the thing that this is jiving on the most.
Sure.
There were beats where we were both like, man, it's interesting. I'll say this before we, dive super into the plot. It is really intriguing to see the Disney of 15, 16 years ago compared to the Disney of now, where the only movies Disney rips off now are their own, and their own formulas and stuff. But back then they were in a position where they were like, shit, we need to rip off Lord of the Rings and we need to do our own thing. That was another element that fascinated me about seeing this movie, was like, what happens when the largest entertainment corporation in the history of mankind does a rip-off movie? Like, and granted, that sounds very dismissive because it's like, well, Chronicles of Narnia is its own thing. It's, existed as a book for so long, and, calling it rip-off makes it sound like some, Italian Mad Max, 1990, the Bronx Warriors or something.
Or makes it sound like direct-to-video, which this was specifically trying to avoid, because a lot of people's conception of this story, particularly in the US, is like the kind of stuff that you could get at the library. It was like, oh, this is the BBC version. Because that was the version I was familiar with.
The TV miniseries, yeah.
That was the version I had definitely checked out from the library when I was a kid. And that was the impression of the story I had. And I do believe that in adapting this for the screen, some cues were borrowed from that BBC version. So the immediate opening of the film, going back to what we were talking about, is not something you and I expected. We understood that this was a World War II set film, but if you read the book, the opening of the book does not detail exactly what's going on. They make it seem like the kids made it out of London before the bombs fell. But in this adaptation...
And we opened during the Blitz.
Yeah, this adaptation, the first few shots, it's like, am I watching... What is this, Overlord? Like, it really does open during the Blitz. And so by the time the first 5 minutes of the film are done, these kids are bombing survivors, which is a big change. And it immediately made me wonder, like, how is this movie going to actually deal with the consequences of making these kids survivors of a bombing? Like,
how
not
indeed.
just, it made me think, like, is it going to be more of like an allegory about how these kids construct their fantasy world as like an escape from living in war? Like, is this going to weigh so heavily on them that this movie is going to be a bit more allegorical? Or is this going to talk about the cost of war as it relates to children and its effect on children? I thought, this would be like such, an interesting thing. And I hoped I would pick up on more of that kind of stuff that they would drop into. I thought for sure there had to be a little bit of something like that in here.
I mean, that would be phenomenal. It's a great thing to explore.
It'd make all the sense in the world. It's a 2 hour and 23-minute movie.
Yeah, it has the time to do it. And, because this is such a change from the opening of the book, you think it's like, well, this is a big opening thematic statement. It's about, being terrified of war and the cost that these children have to pay, in terms of, being shipped away after the Blitz happens. They have a father who I don't know the book at this point in my life, but was their dad dead or was he just in the war?
In the movie, they didn't talk about it at all.
Edmund, one of the kids, runs back and gets his dad's photo, and it's him in uniform, and they make allusions to something, but I maybe we missed it, maybe or something. I couldn't tell you if it's like, oh, he's away fighting in the war or he died during the war.
Yeah, it's one of these like Disney ambiguity things, but like as far as I know, the book leaves it just as ambiguous. But this to me, having this big opening was immediately understandable, like, and why they would do it, because like they want to make the conflict more present. It's more cinematic. It's more attention grabbing. Like, of course they would do this for a movie. Like I immediately understood the why behind the decision, but then the movie then falls into a fairly accurate and slightly built out adaptation of the novel. So the novel's sort of like first act is very sketchy. It just sort of like details like, yeah, and the kids went to this house, and then it doesn't really start having like in-depth dialogue scenes until the kids are like, what are we going to do with all this free time?
Right.
And this, like, you have these, the montage of them on the train going out there, which is a beat that was kind of borrowed from the BBC version.
Also feels very, very Sorcerer's Stone.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of imagery sort of borrowed with the trains that feels very, familiar to anyone who's seen those first couple of Harry Potter movies. So, it puts us, puts the audience in familiar territory. It will make kids be able to relate to and understand the story. But I wish, with 4 characters and each of them getting perspective time, they could have used this first act time a little bit, differently in being able to explore the perspectives of the kids and like how, what they've been through has affected them. Because really what they're trying to get to is like, okay, we got to get this fucking kid into Narnia stat.
Shove that stupid little brat in a wardrobe. That's what people came to see.
Yep.
Like, and that's like, they are in Narnia. I think it's at like the 11-minute mark.
Well,
like,
she's in Narnia,
Lucy,
like Lucy. Yeah.
Yes. Lucy, the youngest, of the siblings. They're playing hide and seek. She hides in this big wardrobe at the professor's place where they're staying. There's a nanny character that seems to be something of a menace to them. And so they're playing hide and seek. She goes into the wardrobe, and through the wardrobe, I'll say this moment, which is probably the most important initial selling point of the movie, in which we are introduced to Narnia. She's going through the coats, and then all of a sudden the coats become branches on these on trees, and snow. We can see snow on the branches, and then she's in Narnia.
Yeah,
it works. Like, it totally works.
It's really beautiful. Lucy's first introduction to Narnia, for a couple of big reasons. Number one, the production aspects of it are gorgeous. It's not, super beautifully shot in terms of like, let's make some insane vistas and all this kind of stuff. Or let's make sure the lighting's
kind
is
of
like,
basic.
Yeah, but it's supposed to emulate natural lighting on a snowy day. And I like that this isn't like this huge action-packed stumble into a fantasy world. It's small, it's mysterious. There's an intimacy to it, and it's the first time in a movie we're actually getting to explore one of the kids' solo perspectives.
Right.
And there's a lot of like wordless stuff of her exploring this new environment that's actually quite compelling.
Just touching shit like that.
Yeah.
That's something that, as another thing, is looking at this as a relic, because this is a relic now, especially for Disney. Looking at this and being like, wow, she's touching real things, and there's sets and tactile snow. It's not a green screen Atlanta warehouse void space, which it would be today.
Mm-hmm, totally. No, the practicality of the set and, exploring this world, much in the way that Lewis did, like through this very small and almost mundane introduction where it's like she's in a snowy wood and finds a lamppost, and there's a guy there, and he seems to have a couple of packages under her arm. He's a fawn. He's got horns, and he's got legs, and so they introduce these little fantasy elements that don't overwhelm with like this immediate like, oh my god, I'm in a fantasy world. And so they build this really beautiful magical introduction for Lucy. This again is the best thing about the movie. It feels legitimately magical. The score also is really working in the movie's favor at this point. It sounds different from Howard Shore. It sounds different from John Williams. I was really into what the movie was doing in this. Yeah.
No, Harry Gregson Williams' score is pretty good. This whole moment, I mean, it's not a 1-to-1, but in that same kind of tactile, sort of mundane, very whimsical way, this is our entrance to the Shire.
Mm-hmm.
This is that, it's like, hey, this is a fantasy world, but we're not seeing like, weirdo freaking creatures that have names like Gorblaxes or anything. It's like, it's a lamppost and winter, and then there's a fawn.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay. And of course, that's the initial start of the book. And it's a great, when you talk about like, prompts, like how you prompt a story, that's a great hook. It's like you're in the middle of a snowy field, there's just one random lamppost, and then there's a fawn. It's like, great, we're off. Like, that's a great start to the story. And this was probably a lot of people's introduction to James McAvoy, who plays the fawn, Mr. Tumnus. He is maybe too good for this movie. Like,
possibly, yeah.
The interactions between him and Lucy are maybe the only moments of genuine emotion that I felt throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, it's the only thing to me in the movie that felt genuinely magical for a couple of reasons. Like, number one, both performances in that scene are doing exactly what they need to do. McAvoy's great, of course. And then out of the 4 child actors, the youngest, Lucy, is oddly the best.
Mm-hmm.
So everything from her perspective feels like, oh, wow, this is really working. She's not cloying or annoying. Like, all her line deliveries are just fine.
She gets good reaction shots.
Absolutely. Yeah, her reaction shots are great. Which also means that the film was edited and shot fairly well too. So it shouldn't go without saying that this was directed by Andrew Adamson, who had not directed a big live action feature before. This is his first live action feature that he's credited with. Before this, he had directed Shrek and Shrek 2. He was an animation guy.
Yeah, and I'll say this, I think directorially, the movie's fine, but it rarely, if ever, rises above functional. It works, but it's nothing. Part of the reason I think Lord of the Rings and those early Harry Potter movies really took off was they had strong directorial visions behind them. There are images crafted in those movies that feel like, yeah, only Peter Jackson, only Chris Columbus could have come to that place with these particular, these worlds and these characters.
Yeah.
Whereas Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's like, I said this to you as it went on. It's like, yeah, this just kind of looks like every single like fantasy wannabe hit that's come out in the last 10 to 15 years. Yeah.
Columbus, had clearly established like a really good job with children's perspective in Home Alone. That almost that entire movie being set in Kevin's perspective and like the way he sees his world is like one of the really great things about that movie. And then here you have 4 children's perspectives to dwell in. And there's only one perspective that really feels ultimately kind of moot or really irrelevant by the end of the film. And that's Susan, who's the oldest girl. She's played by Anna Popplewell. And not only is the performance just not there, but I think her biggest scene, which is, spoiler alert, watching the death of Aslan and the eventual resurrection of Aslan, like it's not a solo thing for her. Lucy is there as well. And we're already attuned to be like, okay, Lucy's perspective is really important and it has worked the best so far out of anybody.
Well, if we're going to go down this road, I didn't think we'd get here this soon. Because this is maybe the thing that tanks the movie for me in a lot of ways, is that Lucy's perspective is the only one that works, that I'm invested in. Edmund is the character who should be the most interesting.
Right, because he has a turncoat plot, and that should be fascinating.
Well, it's not just that he has a turncoat plot. From the outset, he is poised to be kind of the outsider of the siblings. He's the one who runs back and gets his father's picture.
Right. Like he's the only one that gets like a really strong character beat in Act 1.
He gets that. And throughout, before they even get into Narnia, he's seen as like, he is openly called a liar. He is seen as a little shit. And then when he gets into Narnia, he comes across the White Witch, our big bad, played by Tilda Swinton, and ends up being very allured by her. Like he is very much attracted to her in this way of like, she's a comforting presence. She is clearly, like to us, clearly manipulating him, but she comes across as sweet and kindly and, can magic him up some Turkish delight, which I've had and is fucking gross.
It's so awful. British kids have different standards for sweets, particularly in the 40s and wartime. Yeah.
Yeah. That is the best they could get. Like, so, but Edmund, yes, eventually he is the one who is, giving up information about his siblings, because of course there's this prophecy that human children will come into Narnia and there'll be 4 of them and they will become the new kings and queens of Narnia and everything will be great and, Sauron will be destroyed. And so Edmund coming in and having this allegiance to who we know is the enemy, and that's of course from the book. That's interesting. There's so much that could be explored there in terms of why would he be, maybe he doesn't feel a kinship with his siblings. Eventually we get to a point where it's like, oh, he has seen the error of his ways, and how will he atone for that? Unfortunately, the movie never figures out how to properly hit those beats.
Really, yeah, I agree. But really what it should have done is like, why is Edmund particularly vulnerable to the White Witch? And I think the clear answer would be like, oh, he wants the adult attention he's used to getting and is currently not, for all sorts of reasons. The wartime, being separated from his mom, like these are the things that should be established.
I will fault my own memory if this is true, but when they're at the train station and they're saying goodbye to their mom, I don't know if there was a moment, if there was like a lingering moment of Edmund, holding on to his mother tighter than the others, or I don't think that was there, but that's the kind of thing that would, set up that reasoning. It's like, oh, he has a closer relationship for his mom, or he's missing his mom more. So that's why it's very easy for him to fall under the spell of the White Witch. But this is, I said, so I'm going to stay on the kids because that's what we were talking about. Susan
the kids are the thing. Yeah.
Well, there's more to it that I think is a problem, and it has to do with something we were talking about. But Susan and Peter are bad, like just bad characters, poorly written, uninteresting. I don't have his name up, but the kid that plays Peter is straight up not good, and grating to watch.
The guy's name is William Moseley, and I can only hope he became a better performer throughout the next two movies, because his performance is
Well, it may not even be his performance. It may be the script he's given. Peter is, as the movie goes on, Peter becomes kind of like they want to position him as one of, if not the main protagonist, because he's going to be the king. He's the one who's got to lead everybody in this big fight. And it feels totally undeserved, completely like it's never built up properly at all. And add to that then this kid actor who just is not giving a good performance. They try and create some kind of inner conflict between Susan and Peter, where Susan blames Peter. She's like, it's your fault. You're the reason we're here. And like, we should, and it's like, this has literally been manifested from nothing.
Yeah, no, so many beats with him feel absolutely unearned. And then Susan is an absolute just nobody in the movie. Her perspective seems to matter so little. And I'm rereading the book now, but I sincerely hope there's at least something more in the book that she gets to do that's really important, because in this movie, her perspective feels cuttable, basically. It's like, well, why is this character here?
No, absolutely. Now, the other thing that I was alluding to that's a problem is it's not this particular person's problem, because as we said, Tilda Swinton is playing the White Witch. Tilda Swinton could read the phone book and I'd give her every Oscar. Like, Tilda Swinton just never doesn't show up. Like, and she shows up here. She absolutely gets, I think, what she was being directed to do. You have to be chilly because you're the Ice Queen, and you have to be kind of ethereal. Big surprise, Tilda Swinton can do that in her sleep.
Of course.
But you
have to be kind of severe because
Tilda I mean, she has to be scary in certain points. She's the villain, but here's the big issue. The White Witch in this movie is a shit villain because there is no depth of any kind. It's like I would have taken even, a bird bath's depth of why she is evil. Like in Lord of the Rings, or to make another comparison to this, you could say it's like, well, it's the same thing. Sauron is just evil. And it's like, yeah, but he's essentially killed in the beginning, and we get this big prologue to really build up how fucking bad he is. Like, he's the biggest bad that's ever existed. But
here's the thing. Lord of the Rings is not a fairy tale. It is high fantasy, but it is not a fairy tale. Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is absolutely a fairy tale, and C.S. Lewis has called it a fairy tale. He originally intended it to be a fairy tale for children. One specific child, actually. In the introduction, he dedicates it to one specific child. Well,
sure. I mean, and then I'll be even more direct. The Hobbit. Like, if you want to compare, Smaug is a fantastic villain in the book. And that is something, again, that he is properly built up. The reason we're supposed to be scared of Smaug is very, very clear in that book. Whereas the White Witch, I didn't need her to be like, okay, you know, like, I didn't need them to do like a Snow White and the Huntsman thing where it's like, well, let's have, you know, a somewhat sympathetic backstory for her, and that's why she's evil. There's just never the sense that her evil has any purpose.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, even obviously her motivation is to rule. Like, she's been the ruler of Narnia. She wants to continue to be the ruler of Narnia. Why? It's for fairy tale reasons. Basically, it's because she wants to, and I would, you know, as shallow as it might be, it's like, well, you know, thinking about Dune, it's like she wants to make all the money and control the spice production. I don't know, something. But I would also like there to be like a deep-seated character thing for her. But again, the kids are missing the same thing.
Here's the thing. I don't need it to be that, you know, I want all the apples in Narnia. It didn't need to be that. I needed a scene where if it's like, okay, she's fairy tale evil, fine. Where's a scene of her relishing in being an evil character? Where's the scene that's, if the motivation is, I'm evil because I'm fucking evil, then have that. That's not here.
Yeah.
Like, she is an extremely plot created character.
She only gets one like really truly electric scene, and that's when she does the whole Turkish Delight thing. Like, that's her best scene. It's really when she gets the chance to shine, because you get that sinister edge to the performance the whole time, and there's actually a really good amount of tension created there with her performance. It
initiates a mystery about the character. Like, we know she's bad because we've been told that she's bad by Mr. Tumnus, you know, because he was supposed to, you know, give Lucy over to her, but he didn't. He let her escape. So we've been told, like, oh yeah, White Witch is bad. So in this scene, when she first meets Edmund, it is like, oh, this is the person we were told is bad. We know as the audience that she's bad. Edmund doesn't. And she's coming off as very kind and, oh, look, let me put my coat over you and everything. And we know this is bad. So there's an element of mystery. It's like, all right, why is she so bad? And they never return to that question. Like, it's just, now she's bad. And now granted, it's Tilda Swinton. So she fucking looks great. She fucking acts great. The scene in which the most direct, we have not talked about this at all, and I know somebody's going to bring it up in the comments, so we have to mention it in some capacity, is that yes, C.S. Lewis was a fervent Christian, and the Chronicles of Narnia books are littered with Christian allegory. Aslan is Lion Jesus. There's no debating it. Like, it's very clear. And the one scene that feels like the most fun evil, but it can't because it's the big sad moment, is when she kills Aslan. And there is very clearly, you know, a mock-up of kind of like a Stonehenge structure behind her. And there's all these, you know, gruesome monsters made by Greg Nicotero and Howard Berger, by the way.
Well, and folks at Weta.
And Weta, yeah.
You know,
they did a lot of the digital
tons
stuff.
of great makeup and like practical creatures in this film. Like, it shouldn't go without saying, like, this movie was quite a production, and
yeah, they
spent its money in like the right places
in a lot of ways. Yeah,
scenes.
But this moment in which she is sacrificing has to humiliate him first, like, shave him, which fucking cracked me up.
Let him be shaved, or whatever he says.
This is, you know, well, this. I mean, look, I was raised a good Christian boy, so I know it's like, yeah, this is Jesus walking to crucifixion. People are throwing stones and tearing at his robes.
Yeah,
like, I get it. But this moment when she kills him is the most like, oh, look at these horrible pagans, and they killed our savior. Like, and that was the one moment where I was like, you know, obviously Disney wanted to sand off a lot of the, I'm sure, direct Christian elements of the story. But this was the one moment I felt they were able to get in and be like, yeah, look, we took pagan imagery and made it look real bad and evil. And I was like, this is, you know, I don't agree with this at all, but it's fun. It's fun seeing that kind of directness because it's there in the story.
Oh yeah. I mean, I really like the movie's eagerness to actually confront these themes directly. And it is trying to be a fairly direct adaptation without a whole lot of like new spin or perspective added. That I can respect from a standpoint of adaptation. Like, they know that part of the acclaim, the fan acclaim from the, for Harry Potter movies and for the Lord of the Rings movies is a sense that they are adapting these things accurately, or at least knowing what fans want to see, and also being able to predict what non-fans would like to see. So there is this, there is this striving for like a perfect medium of like, what will newbies to this material, what will neophytes to this material want to see, and then what will people who love the books want to see? And there's a trying to strike a medium that comes off in this movie as like trying to please too many people, and therefore this movie is pretty bland in the art department.
Well, not just the art department. I think thematically it feels so safe and so actually unwilling to examine more complicated elements of itself. Like we were making a joke at the beginning about the, obviously opening with these kids escaping the Blitz is going to have some kind of commentary to follow through, because we just know from the source material that eventually these kids are going to be conscripted into war. Like that these are going to be, they are turned into soldiers, and the movie, and I know the books never, ever, ever try and reconcile, like, wait a minute, is sending kids to war a bad thing?
Yes, and it also needs to reconcile with this idea that like kids do have war fantasies. Fantasies of being powerful, violent people, of, yes, I'm the soldier, cops and robbers. People are always fantasizing about, like, when you're young, like, how does this sort of conflict, this violent conflict make me feel more mature, make me feel more like an adult? Like, how can I fantasize about what it means to be an adult? And violence factors into that.
Oh, sure.
And of course, this movie being the kind of fairy tale for children it was intended to be, I don't think could really grapple with that.
I'm not saying it had to do that.
No.
But here's the thing. Then don't have that opening. Like, that opening is what set a tenor of like, hey, this is exploring something a little bit deeper and darker and more morally complex. But then it completely abandons it by the second half of the movie, where it's like, hey, y'all got to fight in war, and it's because you were chosen by prophecy, and that's it. There's rarely, if ever, a moment that I can recall where any of the kids has what they needed. It's fine if the end result is like, yes, we have to fight this war. I'm not saying that they, I have to be some anti-war person and be like, no, they had to completely grapple with it. What they need, to make another reference to Lord of the Rings, is Frodo and Gandalf in the Mines of Moria. I wish the ring had never come to me. Like,
sure,
that moment of a kid saying like, I wish I didn't have to do this. And then Aslan going like, yeah, of course you don't. But these are the times you're in, and this is what you have to do because it's the right thing to do.
Right. They need a moment of regret and the refusal of the call, because one of the things we're talking about here that we haven't quite mentioned yet is prophecy. There is a prophecy that for children of Adam and Eve will come to Narnia and will fill the four thrones at Cair Paravel, or whatever the hell the castle is called. So
I did mention that in passing pretty earlier about them needing to fulfill these roles, and
sure.
And the thing is that what we're really talking about is Campbellian story cycle.
Right.
Like,
refusal of the call, but also just like recognizing how heavy this is. Like instead, the movie wants to concentrate on the power fantasy of like, what would it be like to be a child and feel empowered with like, yes, you get to wield the sword and wear the crown and sit on the throne, and like think of how powerful and good it would feel to do all these things. And, from a certain childlike perspective, like, of course, that would be alluring as a power fantasy. But the movie doesn't really deal with the consequences of like what this really is. Like, Peter, he wields this sword that fucking Santa Claus gives him. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Oh yeah. By the way, yes, we cannot end this episode and not mention War Santa shows up, played by the actor who played like the guy who led the Night's Watch in Game of Thrones.
Oh, his name is James Cosmo.
James Cosmo. He shows up out of the blue. They think it's the White Witch, but it's Santa on his reindeer sleigh, and he comes packing Like literally, like he gives him a sword and some like life juice. And, it's very like, again, another direct, like, oh man, this is Galadriel handing out those gifts. I give you the light of Elendil. But it's way funnier because it's fucking Santa. And there is a moment there where, Santa says something about like, oh, a war is bad or something. Hey, Peter, take this sword. And then Peter is like, I thought you said war is bad. And Santa's like, Lucy, here's your water. Like,
yeah. It's so funny how they get these gifts. It's like these things that you'll need. And it's like, well, here's a sword and like bow and arrow and shit like that. And it's like, it's saddling these kids with these adult roles basically. And telling them like your adult role in the war is a gift. And it's so mind boggling to me to be like, there was a draft going on.
Exactly. Well, this is something else that this is such a Bush era movie, which is nuts to me watching it, where it's like, oh yeah, it's part of the reason why I think Lord of the Rings and something like Harry Potter did really well, because as far as the evil was concerned, there was never a question. The evil was evil. It was very clear. There was no moral complexity to the evil characters that we were dealing with, but there was always some reflection, whether it be Frodo or Harry, like really weighing the weight of this task that they've been given out, not of their own, that it's like, this is something that's come to me, not of my choosing. And now I'm saddled with it. And I wish I wasn't. And that's, that's Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. Like it's a wonderful moment to explore. Now, like I said, it doesn't mean that the outcome of exploring that has to be, I don't want to fight war. Like I'm done. You can refuse that call and then still come around to like, no, this is the thing I need to do. I'm motivated for the right reasons to fight. But there is literally a moment where the character Peter is like, it's Peter or Susan, I can't remember which one, who is like, I thought you just said war kind of sucks. And Santa literally laughs it off. Like
pretty much, yeah. It is mind blowing. This movie's take on Father Christmas is fascinating and also very ugly. He basically only has a cameo. And one of the strangest things about the scene is that it is kind of a stylistic echo of the scene where the ring wraith is tracking the hobbits in Fellowship of the Ring, and they hide under this like, hollow spot in the hill. The way that they play this and the way they stage this scene is almost a direct echo of that. And for Santa to be there,
you say echo, I say ripoff. I'm very married to that word, because Disney ripped shit off. Like, and just because they're a giant corporation that makes all this stuff doesn't mean they are immune to trying to rip shit off. And I totally forgot about this. It is an incredible, like just plastered copy and paste version of the iconic ring wraith over the tree scene. Like, I can't believe that they went that far with it. But yes, so I mean, eventually these characters got to fight in a big war on a big field with a bunch of creatures that we haven't seen before. And, it's fine, but like visually, again, it looks like like Jack the Giant Slayer or some other movie that nobody cares about. Like,
that movie sucks so much, and fuck Bryan Singer.
Just that's the thing, but there's been so many of those. There's so many of them that I'm forgetting, because that's the thing, is that there was this push to make this kind of stuff, and Narnia obviously had name recognition because of the books. And by the time it gets to this point where the big war is happening, it's like, all right, like Tilda Swinton's got a cool helmet. Her costume and makeup's pretty cool, but
yeah,
the weight of everything is non-existent.
No, because there isn't enough of a sense of what she's fighting for. What does she want, and why does she want it so bad? And if she's just a simple fairy tale character, then I need to get more of a sense of her as like an elemental being and not a human being.
Sure. I mean, if she wants to, if they want to use her and her winter aesthetic to be an allegory for dark times in human history, the winters, of our discontent, that kind of stuff, play with that, do stuff with that, have her vocalize that. Instead, she's really, really reduced to being an action figure here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And especially sucks because it's Tilda Swinton.
Well, it does suck because it does mean that they're underutilizing Tilda Swinton, but it also means because it's Tilda Swinton, she's pretty compelling in every fucking second on screen. She just inhabits a role in a way that so few performers do. You know, when they get the costume and the makeup on her, it's like, fuck yeah, I really like watching this performer do pretty much anything. Like you said, read the phone book.
Yeah, well, you know, it's like, of course she looks cool. Again, she's Tilda Swinton. Like, she's never not looked cool. Like, any getup you put her in, even if it's a mundane human, it's like, man, she's just a cool looking person. And I wish she was shot better. Like, this entire battle scene it's not chaos cinema. It's not shot poorly, but there's just like, you know, they go up in the air and there's some like eagle characters that are getting shot. I'm like, who the fuck cares? Like there's nothing here that feels the weight. There's never the only interesting thing that happens during this battle scene is that the White Witch stabs Edmund.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, oh yes, that's a good arc for the relationship that these two characters had. Now, granted, Edmund has been a pretty useless character throughout the movie because he just repeats the same beat like 3 times where the White Witch is going to hurt him or hurt a friend of his or someone, like he's thrown in prison with Mr. Tumnus. She's going to hurt Mr. Tumnus. And so, you know, she'll be asking Edmund for some information. He won't give it to her. She threatens violence. And he goes, wait, I'll tell you the thing now. And I mean, that exact beat happens like 3 times.
It sucks. But, you know, this whole idea of, you know, the White Witch in battle and like this war against the White Witch, they whiff this. There are some moments in this battle that feel, I don't know, okay from like a second unit standpoint where it's just like, yeah, we need scenes of like battle happening. And they feel kind of remarkably violent for what the movie is. You know, one of the things I love the most about it is there's this like big Minotaur character that feels like one of her seconds in command, and it's a big practical Minotaur. It looks incredible. There's actually a bunch of practical like goblin creatures. Amazing. It's one of like the many tactile pleasures that the movie wields.
Even some of the digital stuff still looks good. I mean,
the beavers look good.
Yeah, Ray Winstone's playing a beaver. Rupert Everett's playing a fox. Even Aslan, played by Liam Neeson. It's like, you know, they did this whole realistic lion thing again 14 years later. And I don't know, the Narnia one, while he doesn't look as realistic, they know that, and he's actually more expressive than the ones in the Lion King remake because they're like, yeah, he's still a fucking cartoon.
No, I mean, there's the shot where he gets stabbed by the White Witch when he dies. It's actually a really good reaction shot.
Yeah.
So for 2005, this was actually kind of boundary pushing for visual effects.
I'm sure. I mean, you know, it was Disney and they had all the money to burn, and they were, you know, Weta was coming off of Lord of the Rings, and they clearly spent the money, like to have Weta and then, you know, Nicotero and Berger working on certain effect stuff. It's like you're clearly going for the cream of the crop.
Totally.
And the cream always rises to the top. So
the cream always rises to the top.
So
oh yeah,
K&B. It's not K&B, but you're gonna have a whole Randy Savage diatribe diversion again. But so yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me, coming around to kind of final thoughts and finishing up the movie, is that they eventually made 2 sequels to this. This movie actually feels like they tried to make 3 books into one movie. Like the way that it ends, it certainly leaves the door open for a return. But I mean, it really feels like the end of Return of the King by the time, you know, they're sitting on thrones and getting crowned and you've all won and, you know, you bow to no one. Like it really feels like that moment. And
well,
then
I mean, this is the text. I mean, this is what the book actually does. And because it is written as a fairy tale, and in prose, it often feels like broad strokes for children. On the page, it feels acceptable.
Fair enough.
In a movie, it feels too flighty. It feels like it's actually not dealing with the weight of what it's showing.
Well, here's the thing. If this was the end of the movie, I would agree with you. I'd be like, you know what? It feels very, you know, compressed, but this is the note that this story is supposed to end on. It doesn't end there.
No.
We jump forward years later when they have been ruling over Narnia and they are adults now. And I had a little like, wait a minute, what the fuck's going on? Like, this is weird. This is like, what's going on? And they're riding through the forest.
Right. And on the page that could easily be, and they ruled benevolently and beautifully, and there was a happy ever after moment. On the page as a fairy tale for children, that works. In a movie, it's like, what?
Well, in this one, it's like they're adults and they're riding through the forest and they come across the lamppost and they all kind of, they're like, this seems familiar. Like they've been there so long that they don't remember that they actually come from Earth. Like, and so they're like, oh, what's this, huh? And then they go through the forest and they pop back out the wardrobe and are kids again. And it's like, I hate to be like this feels like a very like Rick and Morty writing idea where it's like, how are you not grappling with the fact that these kids have lived a lifetime? And like, now they're just kids again. They were rulers of a fantasy land. And now they've come back and it's just like, whoop, we're kids again, goople gobble. Like, and that's it.
Yeah,
I'm like,
it's a lot of ground to cover. That's for sure.
Well, and again, I mean, your argument about like, it's a fairy tale at times, sometimes
and a power fantasy for children. But
at times it like great fairy tales also do allow us good allegorical moments to reflect on their deeper thematics. This movie is not interested in doing that at all.
No,
like, it's never interested in crafting a moment that really invites that kind of dissection. Like, and again, it's like, well, it's for kids. Like, it should just be for kids. Like, kids are stupid. And it's like, okay, like, fine. Like, and that's why, like, at the end of the day, this movie's okay. Like, it's fine. And it's certainly fine for its target audience. But like, and I'm going to make this comment about the books, which I have not read. I haven't read since the elementary school days. It really feels like lower hanging fruit in terms of these kinds of stories. Like it doesn't feel nearly as compelling or the world. Like I'll say this too. I don't think the world of Narnia is very interesting
as it is portrayed in this movie.
Yeah,
I would agree with you.
That's what I'm saying. Like the thing about stuff like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings is part of it is like, wow, this world is vast and different and weird and fantastical and wondrous. Narnia here, it's like, all right, it's like a big field mostly.
Yeah, there's some New Zealand landscape and some poorly composited green screen stuff. And yeah, the specificity of the vision is not there. It's there with Harry Potter. It's there with Lord of the Rings, but it's not really here. And Narnia is, as written by C.S. Lewis, kind of whatever he needed it to be. It's this vast variety of fantasy landscapes. And I appreciate the malleability of it from the standpoint of writing fairy tales. But for this movie, it does not feel quite specific enough.
Well, and, part of that is narrative in that, Narnia is supposed to be, it's been ice blasted by the White Witch. So it's just a lot of big snowy terrain.
Sure.
So I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. And then like, well, that's just what you're kind of stuck with is a bunch of icy places.
For a long time, yeah.
Yeah, but even when it's like, oh, look, the ice is melting because Narnia is returning because the prophesied ones have come and you'll help our Lion Christ, defeat her. It's like, all right, like, can we see some like places that like feel worth saving? Even though we never go back to the Shire in Lord of the Rings, the idea of the Shire is something that so many of those characters are fighting for.
Mm-hmm.
It's that place. And we've been in that place. We can smell those fucking hobbit holes.
Right.
Like, and in Narnia, it's just like, there's a lamppost.
Right. Yeah. Is it worth fighting for? Like, is it worth getting embroiled in war for? And I feel like there would be a more definitive answer if we had defined what Narnia meant to these children metaphorically, or if we had defined what it meant for the story allegorically. But it's not there. It is just not there. I think there are so many places where this movie could have opened up the metaphorical potential or like explored these things just a little bit deeper and yet maintained its status as a film that was accessible to children.
Sure.
At the like PG rating level. Like there are ways that this could have done it. And its shallowness is really like its ultimate sin. Because like from a production standpoint, there's plenty admirable about it. And of course there are issues with child actors, but hey, they're child actors and it's always fucking hit or miss, and usually more miss than hit.
You hit the nail on the head when you talk about shallowness. The shallowness is kind of present in almost every aspect of the movie. It's an overarching shallowness. It's not just that the themes are shallow or the characters are shallow or the allegory is shallow. It's everything. Like, it just never feels that it ever wants to risk going any deeper, because going any deeper would mean complicating the story or the characters, and it doesn't ever seem to really want to do that.
Yeah, and I think that this is not necessarily a problem that's specific to the movie. It is a problem in adapting fairy tales for children to big event live action cinema.
So yeah, I mean, Narnia, it's fine. Like, for everything that we've, kind of heaped on it, it's not like an offensive experience. It wasn't like I was, except during the battle sequence, because again, by that point, it was like, none of this really feels truly earned, and the stakes don't feel real. Other than that, it wasn't ever really boring. It was like, it's fine. It's, the pacing's fine. Like I said, as a production, it's absolutely a relic and a good one. Seeing sets and tactile things that actors are interacting with is great. But yeah, I absolutely see why this has exited the conversation. Because there's not really a whole lot to delve past the surface with. I mean, if you want to get into all the Jesus Christian allegory stuff, I'm sure there is, but I feel that that's probably even better presented in the original text.
I would agree. And I think this brings us to a really excellent transition to the shelf, because there's a movie I'm fucking dying to talk about.
Well, then we'll head over to the shelf, where we pick some movies that act as good pairings or substitutes for our main topic. And we encourage you, listener, to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf pick, because the shelf is this beautiful collaborative kind of video store Nirvana heaven place that we've been building here at GenreVision. and it's not something that Travis and I can do alone. We need all of your shelf picks to fill out those shelves. So if you do leave a shelf pick for this episode at GenreVision.com, we will mention it on next week's episode. So Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe?
It's got to be Pan's Labyrinth, and I'll tell you why. Pan's Labyrinth is about a little girl who, in the same era that World War II was going on, there's the Spanish Civil War happening, with Generalissimo Francisco Franco and the fascist takeover of Spain. She and her mother retreat to this country estate, and she has this sort of like fantasy story that unfolds from there. And it takes all of the stuff that I had as far as like problems with Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and does incredible things with it. So this becomes really about her perspective and less about sort of like, performance of dialogue and things like that, and more about like, what does she decide to do? It becomes more about actions. And so when she finds this, when she enters this labyrinth, instead of entering the wardrobe, she encounters this, fantasy world that borders on her own, and meets these fantasy characters, and is given 3 tasks to complete in a very fairy tale sort of way. In
very direct relation to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the first character she meets is a faun.
That is correct. The Spanish title of the film, the original title of the film, was The Labyrinth of the Faun, El Laberinto del Fauno. And what I love about this is that this is very directly about her reactions to the horrors of war and the direct effect of toxic masculinity, and how war and toxic masculinity are directly intertwined. Mm-hmm. Fantastic film. And I've seen criticisms, and I think they might be well warranted, that Ophelia, the protagonist of this, is a little thinly drawn, but she's nowhere near as thinly drawn as the 4 protagonists of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We understand why she, as somebody who's been an only child, would want her mother's attention and would crave the kind of attention that she is now lacking. She has this mother who is had a really rough pregnancy and she's really sick all the time, and and needs a lot of bed rest, and she has this sibling who she's never met, but instantly has a lot of like resentment for, and she has this new stepfather who's just evil as fuck. And it deals with the reality of these things while also knowing the allegorical importance of them. Awesome shit.
I was going to say, I have actually not revisited Pan's Labyrinth since it came out on video. It's one where it's like, man, that movie hit. Like Guillermo del Toro's not made a bad movie. But if someone were to argue that Pan's Labyrinth is his masterpiece, I would not argue against them. It may not be mine pick, but it may not be my personal pick, but I would not, because it's like, it really is that good. But I'll say this, to criticisms that she's thinly drawn. From my memory, I think she's as well written as somebody like Dorothy in Wizard of Oz, because I would
completely agree. Yes.
Yeah. That's the role that, they're supposed to play. And they have their desires and their fears and their fantasies. And that's the core of their characters. That's the movie I always think about when I think of Pan's Labyrinth is Wizard of Oz. It's like, it's very much the same. And something that I like about Pan's Labyrinth and Wizard of Oz in opposition to something like Narnia, where it's a story about people leaving our world and going into this fantasy world, is that in Wizard of Oz and Pan's Labyrinth, it doesn't matter if the fantasy is real.
Nope.
That's the beauty of of the allegory, is like, this could all be, quote, in her head, or it could just be a fantasy that's going on, or it could be totally real. And either way, the power of the story and her decisions and her, where she eventually ends up is equally the same if it's a fantasy or if it's real.
It feels powerfully transcendent in both.
Oh God. Yeah. I still I've only seen Pan's Labyrinth once, and that ending, I'm thinking about it now and a chill is going down my back, because it's so powerful.
It's a stunner. So anyway, that is my shelf pick. Pan's Labyrinth. If you haven't seen it, you should see it, but beware, it is pretty heavy, and
oh yeah,
got a lot of war and violence in it at the same time. What are you pulling off the shelf?
Well, I am doing something that I try not to do very often, but it just seemed to click with this particular movie. I'm doing an anti-shelf pick, and even more so, I'm being really shitty and doing an anti-shelf pick of a movie I've never seen. This is The Nutcracker and the Four Realms. This is a movie I had completely forgot existed until it was mentioned on a show I watch. And I had that moment of like, oh my God, that was real. Like, I completely purged it from my memory. If it hadn't been mentioned, there's a good chance I never would have remembered that movie at all. Talking about Disney and their kind of approach to these certain things. Chronicles of Narnia comes out in 2005, and it's very, very successful, but they kind of, I think, drag their feet on the sequels, it seems, and don't capitalize. In 2010, Disney makes Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland, which very much feels in that same kind of, it took the Alice in Wonderland thing and turned into this big fantasy war muck.
And it made a billy.
That movie did such gangbusters, because it made $1 billion in, a decade ago's dollars. So it's, it made well over $1 billion worldwide, and it completely influenced Disney's fantasy decisions moving forward for an entire decade.
Mm-hmm.
Like every single, I won't say every single, but the majority of the riffs that they did when they were doing their remakes all had this particular thing. They even made an Alice sequel, which is another forgotten Disney movie. And eventually I feel like the nadir of this approach came with the Nutcracker and the Four Realms, because, in relation to Chronicles of Narnia, it's another winter Christmas fantasy thing that they tried to turn into a big high fantasy wackadoo semi Lord of the Rings, but mostly still trying to rip off their own movie, Alice in Wonderland. And I would love to hear in the comments, has anyone ever seen this movie? I don't believe anyone's ever seen the movie. Like, I don't think it actually.
I don't even know if Joe Johnston, who was hired to fix the movie, has seen it.
I don't believe, you can tell me whatever the box office was. I'm like, it's a lie. I don't believe any human being has ever sat through the Nutcracker and the Four Realms, which is such a bad title. It's so bad. It sounds so pretentious. I'm like, why are there only 4 realms? Why not 7? We need more realms to set up for sequels. And this whole idea of trying to turn these particulars, because like the Nutcracker, a fucking fantasy fairy tale ballet being turned into a big, like, now war is upon us, Nutcracker. Like, you know, it's just so dumb and silly to me. And not in a good way, but I just want to know if anybody's watched that movie. Cause I'm sure it's on Disney Plus now, and you're not seeing them paraded out on their banner to be like, hey, it's Christmas time. Watch our Christmas collection.
Yeah. You have to go. You got to go to the fucking magnifying glass icon to be like, no.
Yeah. Whatever, like, you know, collection icons they have on Disney Plus, like, it's our Christmas movies. If Nutcracker, The Four Realms is in there, somebody please screenshot it and put it in the comments. Cause I'm like, there's no way. They've buried that movie. Like, so Nutcracker, The Four Realms, a movie I've never seen and have no intention of ever seeing. So now on that particular note, we will head over to the listener shelf picks for last week's episode on Scrooged. Eric Fuchs went with Groundhog Day and the Star Wars Holiday Special for being the only other Christmas movie that focuses on a character called Lumpy. It's very good. Mr. Milksteak went with some other movies that they saw in the theater around that same time that were very meaningful for them, and that's Star Trek 4 and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, both really good movies. Tim Brennan went with The Ref. That's the Dennis Leary Christmas movie. Stephen Nesbella went with Gremlins 2, which, one of the high points in the art form we know as cinema is Gremlins 2, The New Batch. Dwight Egan Sora had Rushmore and Scrooge, the 1970 version with Albert Finney, which I have never seen a single frame of, and I might check out this Christmas.
Yeah, I might have to do that too.
Yeah, I'm down with that. Albert Finney as Scrooge, great casting. Pale Fire went with 10 Things I Hate About You. Eric Johnson had the Twilight Zone episode that we mentioned, Night of the Meek, both the original version and the 80s version. And Jetpack Jesus went with Miracle on 34th Street, the 1994 version, starring Richard Attenborough, who I will always pop for when he goes, "Oh, Mr. DNA." One of my favorite moments in that movie. Not Miracle on 34th Street, but obviously Jurassic Park. So thank you, everybody. I'm very excited to see all these kind of holiday shelf picks for all these movies. And certainly excited to see what we're going to come out of with Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And if anybody admits to ever seeing the Nutcracker in the Four Realms. So some quick calls to action, but stick around because Travis and I are going to talk about one of the nuttiest movies of the year, bar none. We promise you'll want to stick around for this. So if you like what we do here on GenreVision, please go to the Apple Podcast Store and rate and review the show. These reviews really, really help out the show. And it's such a small thing that can help us find more listeners and maybe even potentially grow the show in some really big ways. We say it every week because it really does matter. We wouldn't say it every week if it wasn't important. So if you leave a written review on the Apple Podcast Store, we will feature it here on the show. And if you want some more GenreVision in your life, you can go to patreon.com/GenreVision and become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month. You'll get access to just absolute a tome of bonus content, including weekly pre-shows. The one we did this week was actually about the video game Shadow of the Colossus. And you also get extended currently consumings that we do once a month. We do bonus material for all the other GenreVision network shows, and then some just other extra stuff when we're feeling like it. Just a whole bunch of more GenreVision goodies are over at patreon.com/GenreVision. Let's do some currently consuming.
Num, 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 num.
I don't remember if I talked about this on the show, or maybe it was one of our Patreon extended currently consumings. But
I don't think we've talked about it yet.
Maybe we haven't talked about it, but I saw the M. Night Shyamalan movie Old, and Travis has recently seen it. Now, I want to talk completely freely about this movie because, it's been out for enough of a while, and, I don't want us to have a whole nother episode because we could talk about Old.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you don't want old spoilers, I would say here's a good point to dip out.
Yeah, I'll just say next week we'll be watching Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2. Come on back. Now let's talk about Old, which, look, I know there's the common narratives surrounding Shyamalan, and some of that it does play true in Old, but I got to give him this. Nobody is making fucking bonkers stuff like this for the mainstream like he is.
Absolutely true. This shit is wacky. And that's one of the best things about it. It's just how audaciously wacky it is.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's problematically wacky.
Oh yeah,
Like,
it's not even a good movie.
No,
but it's totally worth watching if you like his brand of wacky.
The entire meme of like, it's the beach that makes you old is like, yeah, that's pretty much the movie. We don't have to get into super specifics as far as like what is going on, because eventually, yes, the Shyamalan reveal is limp. Like it does fall into that cliche with certain of his stories, but the actual movie is such a nut fest, like of
Drew never stopped nutting.
Yeah, I mean, well, because here's the thing. No character speaks like a human being in this movie. Hardly ever.
Not once.
Yes. So immediately, like, the dialogue is just so engagingly weird and stupid. Like, it's like, all right, I'm strapped in just to hear these people talk and to hear actors like Rufus Sewell try and sell this dialogue.
It's just this movie knows how crazy it is on some level. Like, Shyamalan fucking knew.
Oh, sure.
And it makes movies like this actually it actually puts The Happening in an entirely new light. We're like, oh, this guy actually might be a camp master, where you look at his desires to want to like exercise bad taste knowingly. Like, Old is full of things that are done in such extremely poor taste from a storytelling standpoint and a filmmaking standpoint, but you're like, Shyamalan knows that this is in really poor, like, gross exploitative taste, and yet he's gonna have fun with it no matter what.
Yeah, I mean,
this isn't some tasteful Oscar-nominated ghost story like The Sixth Sense. You know, even Unbreakable, I would say, it has a little bit of distasteful stuff in it, but or like overly sensational stuff in it.
It has a veneer of austerity. Like, it's trying to be austere. Old is like, look, this is like the shit that you would find in EC Comics that they were trying to ban in the 50s.
Right. It is total trash, but it's actually shot really, really artfully. Like, Michael Giolakis, of course, is back to light it and shoot it. And everything that he does with Giolakis is like, you know, he doesn't shoot, you know, shitty coverage of dialogue scenes. Like, every close-up is so meticulously chosen. And, you know, he plays with the audience so wickedly playfully in these moments of like, you know, I'm going to compose the shot in a very specific way to either flirt with the sense of tastelessness of like, oh, we're going to take these two, like,
he is French kissing tastelessness in this movie.
Oh, like, no, okay, you're right. Yeah, he is. But he's doing it in a way that is like, okay, well, how can I keep my PG-13 rating?
Oh yeah, he's smart about that. Like,
and some of the stuff he does is just so gross and stupid, you know, particularly with regards to like the three child characters. Oh
my god! Well, this is where we have to talk about spoiler, because, like, yes, the idea of these kids growing up on this beach super fast, but still having like kid brains, is already like, okay, there's like a shot of the young kid, and for like a long time we don't like have focused shots on the kids' faces, which I think is really great.
Right. Well, there's this like segment of like 5 or 10 minutes in the movie where they're going through puberty really quickly, and so he has close-ups of them. So
there's a shot of the kid's mom, and the kid's, there's no tasteful way to say this, it's just the kid's crotch in his mom's face. And he's talking about like, my swimsuit has gotten too big.
Yeah.
And it's this just like, all right, this is weird. Like, not just conceptually, just the way you're framing it, where it's like, it's just this kid's waist in front of this camera. And then it, you know, the same thing happens, and they mention it with the women. They're like, oh, like the swimsuits, the tops that we have, they're getting too small. And I'm like, whoa.
And you see it, like, the movie is not skirting around it. Like there's this young girl, I can't remember the actress's name who plays the English version, but it's Thomasin McKenzie plays the more grown up, like the teen, the 18. Yeah. But like, she's, you know, she was, it's almost impossible to talk about.
We're going to get put on a list.
I know, right? But Shyamalan's just doing this shit, and I'm like, what? The balls on this guy.
It really is. Like, I mean, it feels genuinely transgressive for a studio released movie.
Yeah, it's like for like a Blumhouse PG-13. It's like, it does feel genuinely transgressive. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's wild. And I mean, later, two of the kids, once they're, you know, I don't know if they're of adult age, but they're certainly of, they're
of childbearing age.
Yes, they're biologically adept at making children. They have sex off screen. Well, then of course the baby's like aging super fast, and there's just shit where like the kid is it? I think it's Nat Wolff in this one.
Yeah, I think it's Nat Wolff.
It's Nat Wolff. Nat Wolff is like
it's the hereditary one.
Yes, and the girl who is now suddenly pregnant after they just had sex that we didn't see it, but it was like, they had a very tender moment in a tent together, where they're close up and they have lines where the line that fucking got is my thoughts have more color now. Which is like, no one has ever said that in human history.
But we understand immediately as a euphemism what it means.
Well, yes, of course, because then the next scene is like, Mom, she's got this huge belly, and Nat Wolff is on the other side of the beach and they're holding him back. And he's yelling stuff like, we're going to get married and we're never going to get divorced and we're never going to fight. And it's like,
on a sincere level works because the two parents are splitting up, but on a satirical level is fucking hilarious.
Oh my God, yes. And then of course they're trying to have the baby, and of course it's stillborn, and like you're like, oh my God, this is going wild. At the same time, all the other adults are like starting to get older. Like they're one of them's going blind, one of them's starting to have like dementia. We also haven't mentioned one of the most crucial characters, and maybe the character of the movie, mid-sized sedan.
Oh yeah, yeah.
which is Shyamalan's attempt at writing a
creepy black man who is used for sexual menace in his first, 5 or 6 scenes in the movie. It is so tasteless. And all of this like knowing tastelessness that Shyamalan does makes this one of the most artful exploitation films of the year. One of the most like audacious wide release films of the year because it's so exploitative.
It's bad.
And also one of the best bad movies of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that because there's moments in this that I want to give him credit for. Like there's a woman who has a calcium deficiency. How could we possibly find out that she has a calcium deficiency? Why not make the first line she says in the movie, I have a calcium deficiency?
Oh, this movie has the most insane dialogue of any wide release film of 2021.
It's got to be
insane. And all of the characters have to announce their name and their occupation if they're an adult. And you know why? It's because one of the kids goes around asking people for their name and their occupation.
That's how he got around.
And it's a joke.
One.
Yeah.
But this lady who has a calcium deficiency, later when she's getting old, her bones are getting much more brittle and they're like sticking out of her and stuff. And she's very, very vain and like hiding her appearance. So
I need my calcium.
Yeah, so I think what she does is she decides to go live in a cave.
She decides to go live in a cave because she's turning into a hunchback crone due to her calcium deficiency.
She decides to live in a cave.
This movie is again, it's the best bad movie of 2021. If you haven't seen it, either don't or you have to. You have to. But maybe don't. But you have to.
That's her character motivation. I'm gonna go live in a cave. I won't spoil what happens with her, but it's generally one of the like cool moments of the movie.
Sure.
It's weird and wild and just like, what the fuck? My God. I mean, I'll admit, like I wish the movie didn't reveal why the beach makes you old. Like,
because it almost starts to work as like a sincere art movie, like allegory. Yeah.
Well, because this entire idea of the two parents, they're going to break up. And I think part of it is because the wife has a sickness, like she has a tumor.
She has a tumor, and it's like she thought that it was like a terminal diagnosis, and so she had this like midlife crisis, and so she has this affair, and so the two main adults, it's Vicky Creeps from Phantom Thread, and one of the guys from Itu Mama Tambien, I forget
Gail Garcia
Bernal, yeah. So their whole thing is like this is like the one last vacation they're going to have with their kids before like they go through this really awful divorce.
Yeah, and I'll say where their story ends up, I'm like,
it's actually quite tender.
It actually works. Like thinking back on it, I'm like, you know what? I think there's so much other kooky shit in the movie that like overshadows that. But when they get to that moment, it's like, you know what? He wrote this well. Like this relationship works. But when the movie finally reveals itself, it is just like another limp kind of glass ending.
It's like a third act reveal of like, oh, actually, we're going to have to deal with all the wacky shit we did and tie it together into a plot. So let's do that.
And who cares? Like, because fucking when people are deciding to go live in caves, who the fuck cares how these things happening? Yeah. Old is it's a remarkable movie. Actually talking about it now, I think I like it more, by how audacious and weird it is. So
it's a bad movie that is also a worthwhile experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I can't help but recommend it.
I'm all for Shyamalan continuing to make stuff like this. Like
totally.
I'm okay, even if it's bad, because it's like, look, nobody else is making characters right. My thoughts have more colors, and I have a calcium deficiency. So like Old, it's one of the movies of the year in some way. Maybe it may end up winning a GV. We'll have to see.
Possibly.
It's very possible, because I don't know how much I've laughed that much since.
And also it really made me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing is that I will say there's almost like there should almost be some kind of, disclaimer before it, because it's like this shit gets icky in a way that I think a lot of people won't be able to handle, and may only be able to handle from an ironic standpoint. Because it does. It gets icky and weird and gross in ways that we do not see in mainstream American films.
Yeah, it was totally unexpected. So, this is a recommendation for a really silly, crazy movie. So
yeah, with our disclaimer of like, trust me, like you got to know what you're getting in for. Like, and you need to know it's going to be gross and weird and bad, but my God.
You got to know that the dialogue is awful, but it's also hilarious.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
So hilarious. Anyway,
so yes.
That is Old.
Well, this is a good note to end on, because we will be closing out our holiday extravaganza next week with Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, which has its fair share of ridiculous, amazing dialogue. I've seen this before, but this will be a first time for Travis, and I'm very intrigued. This will be his first Silent Night, Deadly Night movie too. So
it's true.
We hope you'll join us next week, because it's going to be. We're ending the year on Garbage Day, which feels very appropriate. So we hope you will join us next week for the last GenreVision of 2021. As always, everyone, thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here with my calcium deficiency.
I'm going to go live in a cave.
My arms.